happened in winter, just before New Year's Eve. Frost had locked the village in ice, and a thick fog rolled over the ground. In a small house near the edge of the forest, an old widow named Martha was celebrating Christmas with her grandsons, 12-year-old Thomas and 8-year-old Edward. Their parents were delayed in the city, so Martha and the boys were left alone for the night. The evening was quiet. They sat by the fireplace, telling stories and baking cookies. When the clock struck midnight, Martha tucked the boys in and prepared to go to bed herself. The house was silent, except for the wind howling outside and the creaking of trees in the frost. But then Martha heard something, a crunch of snow outside the windows, as if someone was walking around the house. She tensed. Sounds like that in winter usually meant only one thing. Someone had come near their home. Approaching the window, she carefully looked outside and saw a dark figure in the fog, standing at the gate. The person was draped in a long coat, holding a strange, knotted staff. Martha couldn't make out their face, but she felt a chill run through her. She tried to convince herself it was just a passerby, but the dark figure didn't move. Instead, it turned its head towards the house and stood still, as if looking into the windows. Martha held her breath and took a step back. Just then, she heard a noise coming from the attic, like heavy footsteps crossing the creaky floorboards. Martha whipped around, but no one was supposed to be in the attic. It had been empty for years. She stood frozen, listening, and heard the noise again. Footsteps coming closer, all the way to the stairs. Realizing something was very wrong, Martha rushed to wake the boys. Whispering, she told them to dress quietly and murmured that they needed to get out of the house before someone came inside. Thomas and Edward, frightened by her expression, nodded silently. But as soon as they began to get dressed, the sound of footsteps shifted to a strange, soft tapping, as if someone were gently knocking on the walls, moving around the house. Then came a sinister scratching sound at the front door. Martha grabbed the boys by their hands and quietly led them to the pantry, where there was an old hidden passage that led out to the forest. They crept in, and Martha urged the boys into the tunnel, telling them to run to the neighbours. But she stayed at the door, afraid the stranger would notice them if he heard any noise. The sound at the door grew louder, as though someone was determined to break the lock. The door creaked, and suddenly it swung open into the cold night. Martha, holding her breath, peeked out from the pantry and saw the dark-coated figure step inside. Now his face was lit by the dim light of the fireplace. He had pale, ghostly features and empty eyes. In his hands, he held an old Christmas wreath woven from dry branches and rusted thorns, and on his fingers were several old rings that Martha recognized. They were worn by the old villagers who had died many years ago. He stopped in the middle of the room, casting his empty gaze around, and for a moment it seemed he caught someone's scent. But just as the figure stepped toward the pantry door, the wind suddenly howled through the house, as if something was stopping him. The stranger froze, glanced around the empty room, and as though hearing an unseen call, silently stepped back out, disappearing into the fog. Martha waited until his footsteps faded into the forest, and only then did she call the boys back. The neighbours later mentioned that over the past few years, they had started to notice strange things in the village, as if old spirits were beginning to return on Christmas Eve. Martha knew that she didn't want to celebrate this holiday alone anymore. Now she realised that the fog and the night could bring not only stray guests, but also those who had long left, yet still remembered their way back.